Thomas Miller had been driving the same yellow school bus for Highland Elementary for 15 years. The kids on his route knew him by his kind smile and the way he'd tip his worn blue cap each morning as they climbed aboard. At 58, Thomas had the kind of weathered face that told stories without words, laugh lines around his eyes from thousands of morning greetings, and a steady gaze that put even the most nervous kindergartners at ease. The morning started like any other. Thomas woke before his alarm, a habit formed over decades of early rises. The dim glow of 5:15 a.m. on his bedside clock greeted him as he swung his legs over the side of the bed, careful not to wake his wife Linda, who would sleep for another hour before her shift at the local hospital. Another day, another dollar, he whispered to himself, an old saying from his father that had stuck with him through the years. The wooden floor creaked beneath his feet as he made his way to the bathroom. Something felt different this morning. A heaviness in his chest, a slight tremor in his hands that hadn't been there before. Thomas splashed cold water on his face and stared at his reflection. The man looking back seemed suddenly older, more tired than he remembered. Just need my coffee, he told himself, pushing away the unease that had settled in his stomach. Chowme. Kitchen was quiet. Just the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the gentle hum of the refrigerator. Thomas went through his morning routine with the precision of someone who had done it countless times before. Coffee brewing, 2 pieces of toast with a thin layer of butter, a banana for the road. He packed his lunch in the same blue cooler he'd had for years, a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, and a small bag of pretzels. Thomas glanced at the refrigerator door covered with photos and drawings given to him by children on his route over. The years. A crayon drawing of his bus with "Mr. Thomas is the best," written in wobbly letters, made him smile. Next to it was a school picture of his own son, now grown and living across the country. They hadn't spoken in weeks, something Thomas meant to fix one of these days. As he sipped his coffee, Thomas reviewed his route in his mind. 15 stops, 43 children, names and faces he knew by heart. There was little Zach, who always had a new dinosaur fact to share. May, who was so shy she could barely whisper good morning but would light up when Thomas remembered to ask about her weekend. The Rodriguez twins, who raced each other to the bus stop every day. And Lily, a 3rd grader who had lost her father last year and now gave Thomas a hug every Friday afternoon. They're all counting on me, he murmured to the empty kitchen. The responsibility had never felt heavy until today. Thomas finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, and placed it in the dish rack. He scribbled a quick note for Linda. "Have a good day, love you," and stuck it to the coffee maker where she would see it first thing. Then he grabbed his jacket, cap, and lunch cooler and headed out the door. The pre-dawn air was crisp with early autumn, the kind that promised warmth by midday but nipped at exposed skin in the morning hours. Thomas's old pickup truck waited in the driveway, another faithful companion in his daily journey. The engine protested briefly before turning over, and the radio automatically tuned to the classic country station he preferred. "Good morning, Highland County," the radio announcer's cheerful voice filled the cab. "It's Tuesday, September 9th, and we're looking at clear skies with a high of 68 degrees today." Thomas drove the familiar route to the bus depot, his mind wandering to the weekend fishing trip he was planning. The lake would be perfect this time of year, and he hoped to convince his neighbor Joe to join him. As he pulled into the depot parking lot, he noticed his hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. "Getting old," he muttered, flexing his fingers to steady them. The depot was already busy with activity, other drivers preparing for their morning routes. Thomas waved to Bill and Nancy, who were chatting by the coffee machine in the break room. "Morning. Thomas," Bill called out. "Ready for another exciting day of kid wrangling?" "Always am," Thomas replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Nancy looked at him closely. "You feeling all right? You look a bit pale." Thomas waved away her concern. "Just didn't sleep great, nothing coffee won't fix." He went through his pre-trip routine with the methodical care that had become second nature. Walking around bus 17, he checked the tires, lights, and signals. Inside, he inspected the seats, floor, and emergency exits. Everything was in order, as he knew it would be. He'd done the same checks yesterday afternoon before parking the IA. Bus. As Thomas settled into the driver's seat, adjusting it even though it was already perfect from years of use, Frank, the maintenance supervisor, approached the open door. "Morning, Thomas. Got the paperwork for that squeaky brake we fixed yesterday," Frank said, handing over a clipboard. Thomas took it, noticing the slight shake in his hand again. Frank noticed too. "You sure you're good to drive today?" he asked, concern creasing his forehead. "No shame in taking a sick day if you need it. We can get a substitute." The thought of someone else driving his route, of disappointing the kids who expected to see his face behind the wheel, made Thomas straighten his shoulders. "I'm fine, Frank. Just a bit tired is all. Been driving these roads half my life, could do it with my eyes closed." He immediately regretted the phrase. Figure of speech, of course. Frank didn't look convinced, but nodded anyway. "All right then, drive safe out there." Thomas started the engine, feeling the familiar rumble beneath him. The big yellow bus came, to life, gauges lighting up on the dashboard. He adjusted his mirrors, checked his fuel level, and put on his seatbelt. The morning sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon as he pulled out of the depot, the third in line behind Nancy and Bill. The first few miles were quiet, just Thomas and his thoughts on empty roads. The strange feeling of unease hadn't left him. If anything, it had grown stronger, settling into his chest like a weight. He rolled down his window a bit, hoping the fresh air would help. His first stop was at the corner of Maple and Pine, where the Anderson boys would be waiting. Sure enough, as he approached, he could see them standing with their mother, backpacks ready, the younger one jumping up and down with excitement. Thomas pulled the bus to a stop, opened the door with a hydraulic hiss, and forced brightness into his voice. "Good morning, boys. Beautiful day, isn't it?" Mr. Thomas, the younger boy, Ben, exclaimed as he bounded up the steps. "I lost a tooth last night." He opened his mouth wide to display the gap. "Well, look at that. Did the tooth fairy visit?" Thomas asked, giving the boy his full attention despite the pressure building in his chest. "Uh-huh, I got $2. Big money." Thomas winked at their mother, who smiled gratefully at him. "Thanks for always being so patient with them," she said quietly. "It's the best part of the job," Thomas replied, and he meant it. As the bus continued its route, more children boarded, some sleepy, some chatty, all part of the extended family Thomas had built over years of morning and afternoon drives. He knew which ones needed extra encouragement on test days, which ones were likely to forget their lunchboxes, and which ones were having troubles at home that made the bus ride a welcome respite. At the Wilson farm, he waited an extra minute for Tyler, who was always running late. The boy came tearing down the driveway, shirt half-tucked, shoelaces flying. "Sorry, Mr. Thomas," he gasped as he climbed aboard. "The chickens got out and I had to help Dad catch them." "Farm life," Thomas nodded, understanding. "Seatbelt," he reminded gently. By the time they reached Oak Street, the bus was half full, the noise level rising with each stop as children shared stories and laughter. Thomas kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel by sheer force of will. The pain in his chest had become harder to ignore, a dull ache that occasionally sharpened into something more concerning. At the Baker Street stop, he picked up Zoe, a quiet fifth grader who always carried a book bigger than her head. Today was no exception. "What are we reading this week, Zoe?" Thomas asked as she climbed aboard. She held up a thick volume. "It's about a bus driver who discovers he can travel through time when he drives certain routes," she explained seriously. "It made me think of you," Thomas chuckled. "If I could time travel, I'd go back to when gas was cheaper." Zoe smiled, a rare occurrence that Thomas counted as a victory, and made her way to her usual seat. The morning sun had fully risen now, casting long shadows across the country roads. Thomas navigated familiar turns and stops, the rhythm of the route as ingrained as breathing. But today, each mile felt longer, each stop requiring more concentration than the last. At the corner of Elm and 4th, where the sidewalk was lined with tall oak trees just beginning to turn golden, Thomas felt a sharp pain shoot down his left arm. He gripped the wheel tighter, taking a deep breath as he slowed to a stop. The door opened and 3 more children climbed aboard. greeting him with varying degrees of enthusiasm. "Mr. Thomas, are you okay?" asked Harper, a perceptive third grader, who never missed a detail. "Your face looks funny." Thomas managed a smile. "Just thinking about what I'm having for dinner tonight. Can't decide between spaghetti or pot roast." Harper seemed satisfied with this explanation and continued to her seat, but Thomas caught a glimpse of himself in the rearview mirror. His face was indeed funny, pale and drawn, with beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool morning air. 4 more stops. He could make it. These kids needed to get to school, and Thomas Miller had never failed to complete his route in 15 years of driving. The bus continued its journey, swaying gently as it rounded corners and climbed hills. The children's voices became a distant buzz in Thomas's ears as he focused all his energy on the road ahead. The pain came and went in waves now, sometimes receding enough to let him breathe normally, other times crashing over him with enough force to make him grit his teeth. At the last stop before the school, Thomas pulled over to let on the final group of students. As they filed past him, a small hand patted his arm. "I drew this for you," said a small voice. It was Danny, a kindergartner with a gap-toothed smile. He handed Thomas a folded piece of paper before continuing down the aisle. Thomas unfolded it to find a crayon drawing of a yellow bus with a smiling figure in the driver's seat. Above it, in crooked letters, "Thank you for taking me to school." Something tightened in Thomas's throat that had nothing to do with his physical discomfort. These small moments, these connections, were why he had driven this same route for 15 years. Why he got up at 5:15 every morning. Why he knew he would make it to the school today, despite the pain threatening to overwhelm him. The final stretch of road to Highland Elementary was straight and lined with maple trees, their leaves just beginning to hint at the fiery colors to come. Thomas could see the school building ahead, children already filling the playground. He was almost there. As he pulled into the drop-off lane, Thomas felt a moment of profound relief. He had made it. The bus doors opened, and the children began to file out, backpacks bouncing, voices calling goodbyes and see you laters. "Have a good day learning," Thomas called after them, the same farewell he'd used for years. When the last child had descended the steps, Thomas closed the doors and signaled to pull away from the curb. The pressure in his chest was still there, but somehow knowing he'd completed his morning duty made it more bearable. He had no way of knowing that this ordinary Tuesday would be anything but. That the afternoon route would bring challenges he couldn't imagine. That the lives of everyone who rode Bus 17 were about to change forever. But for now, Thomas Miller drove away from Highland Elementary, cap tipped low over his eyes, hands steady, on the wheel, carrying 15 years of memories and the weight of responsibility he had never once considered a burden. Until today. After dropping the children off at Highland Elementary, Thomas drove the empty bus back to the depot. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long rectangles of light across the empty seats. The silence felt strange after the cheerful chaos of 43 children. Thomas turned on the radio for company but kept the volume low. The pain in his chest had settled into a dull ache, still there but manageable. He'd had heartburn before, maybe that's all this was. Too much coffee on an empty stomach. Still, as he navigated the familiar roads back to the depot, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Getting old is not for the faint of heart, he muttered to himself, a phrase his father used to say in his later years. Now Thomas understood what he meant. The bus depot was quieter now that the morning rush was over. Thomas parked Bus 17 in its designated spot and shut off the engine. The sudden silence was broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and Thomas's slightly labored breathing. He sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel, gathering his strength for the walk to the break room. Frank was in the garage bay, clipboard in hand, inspecting a bus with its hood up. He looked up as Thomas passed by. "Made it back in one piece." "I see," Frank called out. Thomas managed a smile. "Always do." "You got time for a cup of coffee?" "Need to talk to you about the winter maintenance schedule." Thomas checked his watch. He had 3 hours before the afternoon pickup. "Sure thing. Let me grab my lunch first." In the break room, Nancy was eating a yogurt and scrolling through her phone. She looked up when Thomas entered and immediately frowned. "Thomas, you look terrible," she said bluntly in the way of someone who had known him for over a decade. "You're white as a sheet." Thomas waved away her concern as he opened the small refrigerator to store his lunch. "Just tired. Didn't sleep well last night." Nancy wasn't buying it. "My Harold looked like that before his heart attack last year. Have you been to the doctor recently?" The question hit closer to home than Thomas wanted to admit. His last physical had been, when? 2 years ago? 3? The doctor had mentioned something about his blood pressure being a bit high, had given him a prescription that Thomas had filled once and then forgotten about. "I'm fine, Nancy. Just need some coffee." "What you need is a doctor's appointment," she persisted. "When was the last time you had a checkup?" Thomas avoided her eyes as he poured coffee into a styrofoam cup. "I don't remember. Been busy." Nancy snorted. "Too busy to take care of yourself? What good will you be to Linda if you drop dead because you're too stubborn to see a doctor?" Her words hung in the air between them. Thomas knew she was right, but something in him resisted. He'd always been healthy, always been the one others could count on. The idea of weakness, of vulnerability, didn't sit well with him. Before he could respond, Frank walked in, saving Thomas from having to answer. "Nancy giving you a hard time?" Frank asked, reaching for the coffee pot. "Just telling him he looks like death warmed over and should see a doctor," Nancy replied, gathering her things. "But he won't listen to me. Maybe he'll listen to you." She gave Thomas a pointed look before leaving the break room. Frank studied Thomas over the rim of his coffee cup. "She's not wrong, you know. You don't look good." Thomas sighed and sank into a chair. "Not you too. Look, I've known you for what, 12 years now? Never seen you call in sick, never heard you complain. So when I say you don't look right, it means something." Frank sat down across from him. "What's going on? And don't say nothing because we both know that's not true." The concern in Frank's voice broke through some of Thomas's resistance. "Been having these pains in my chest? Started a few weeks ago just now and then, thought it was indigestion or something." Frank's expression grew serious. "And today?" Thomas stared into his coffee. "Worse today. Comes and goes. Shoots down my arm sometimes." "Jesus, Thomas, that's not something to mess around with. That sounds like heart trouble." "I've got the afternoon route," Thomas protested weakly. "Can't leave the kids without a driver." Frank shook his head firmly. "We have substitutes for a reason. I'm calling one in right now and you're going to the doctor." He pulled out his cell phone. "In fact, I'm tempted to drive you to the ER myself." "Don't be dramatic," Thomas said, though the pain chose that moment to flare up again as if to contradict him. He winced, unable to hide it. Frank saw it and stood up. "That's it. I'm calling Linda to come get you. And I'm getting Hank to cover your afternoon route." Thomas wanted to argue but found he didn't have the energy. Maybe they were right. Maybe he did need to get checked out. He thought of the children on his route, waiting for him at the end of the school day. "The kids expect me," he said quietly. "The kids expect a driver who isn't going to have a heart attack behind the wheel." Frank replied bluntly. "Don't make me pull rank on you, Thomas. You're going to the doctor and that's final." Thomas nodded slowly, defeated. "Let me call Linda myself. No need to worry her." Frank hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. But I'm standing right here while you do it." Thomas pulled out his old flip phone. He'd never seen the need for anything fancier, and dialed Linda's number at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. It rang several times before going to voicemail. "She must be with a patient," Thomas said, leaving a brief message asking her to call him back. "I'll try again in a bit." Frank didn't look happy about this development. "How about I call Hank to cover your route and you rest here until Linda calls back? Then we'll figure out how to get you to the doctor." Thomas agreed, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The pain in his chest had receded again, but his arm felt heavy and slightly numb. He didn't tell Frank this, not wanting to add to his friend's worry. While Frank made the call to arrange coverage for the afternoon route, Thomas closed his eyes. Just for a minute, he told himself. Just to rest. He must have dozed off because The next thing he knew, Frank was shaking his shoulder gently. "Thomas, Linda's on the phone." Thomas blinked, disoriented. The clock on the wall showed he'd been asleep for nearly 40 minutes. He took Frank's offered phone. "Linda?" "Yeah, it's me." "No, everything's fine," he lied, not wanting to worry her. "Just wondering if you could pick me up after your shift. Not feeling great today." "No, nothing serious, just tired." Frank's making a big deal out of nothing. "Yeah, okay. See you at 4. He handed the phone back to Frank, who was giving him a disapproving look. "You didn't tell her the truth." Thomas shrugged. "No need to worry her when she's at work. She's picking me up at 4. I'll talk to her then." Frank looked like he wanted to argue, but instead said, "Fine. But you're staying here and resting until she comes. No arguments." Thomas nodded, too tired to fight. "Gonna eat my lunch, though, getting hungry." "I'll get your cooler from your locker," Frank offered, leaving Thomas alone in the break room. The next few hours passed slowly. Thomas ate his lunch without much appetite, then stretched out on the old couch in the corner of the break room. Other drivers came and went, all of them expressing concern at seeing Thomas there during the day. Word had spread that he wasn't feeling well, and Thomas found himself repeatedly assuring people he was fine, just taking it easy for once. Around 2 o'clock, the pain in his chest intensified again, squeezing like a vice. Thomas sat up, breathing deeply, trying to ride it out. No one else was in the break room at that moment, which was both a relief and a concern. The pain lasted longer this time, leaving him sweaty and shaky when it finally eased. "This isn't right," a voice in his head insisted. This isn't something to wait on. But Thomas had always been stubborn. His father had been the same way, never admitting weakness, never asking for help. It had killed him in the end, a massive heart attack at 62. Thomas was only 58. Surely he had more time. The afternoon wore on. Thomas drifted in and out of sleep on the couch, each time waking to the same dull ache in his chest and a growing sense of dread. By 3:30 he'd made a decision. He would ask Linda to take him to the urgent care center after she picked him up, just to be safe, just to quiet the worry in his friend's eyes. At 3:45, Frank came back into the break room. "Linda?" "Called. She's running about 20 minutes late. Got held up with a patient." Thomas nodded. "That's fine. I'm not going anywhere." Frank hesitated. "I could drive you to meet her at the hospital. Might be smarter given how you're feeling." Thomas started to shake his head, but another sharp pain cut through his chest. This one was different. Harder. More insistent. He gasped, clutching at his shirt. Frank was at his side instantly. "That's it, I'm calling an ambulance." "No," Thomas managed through gritted teeth. "No ambulance, too expensive, just give me a minute." But the pain didn't ease. If anything, it grew worse, spreading down his left arm and up into his jaw. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead, and his vision began to blur at the edges. Frank's face swam before him, mouth moving, but Thomas couldn't make out the words through the roaring in his ears. He felt himself sliding sideways on the couch, unable to stay upright. Distantly, he heard Frank shouting for help, felt hands lowering him to the floor. Someone was loosening his collar, checking his pulse. Voices buzzed around him, urgent and afraid. Thomas tried to focus, tried to tell them he was okay, but the words wouldn't come. His thoughts turned to Linda, to the kids on his route who would be wondering where he was, to the note he'd left on the coffee maker that morning. "Have a good day. Love you." Was that enough? Did she know how much she meant to him? The pain receded suddenly, replaced by a strange floating sensation. Thomas felt light, detached from the commotion around him. He could see Frank performing CPR, could see Nancy on the phone, tears streaming down her face. He wanted to tell them it was okay, that he didn't hurt anymore. His last conscious thought was of bus 17 sitting empty in the depot lot. He hoped Hank would remember that Zoe liked to sit in the third row, that Ben was afraid of the heater fan, that Tyler always needed a reminder to buckle his seatbelt. The kids would be okay. They were strong and resilient. And somehow Thomas knew he had made a difference in their lives, just as they had in his. As darkness closed in around him, Thomas Miller let go of his worries, his pain, his responsibilities. For the first time in 15 years, someone else would have to drive the afternoon route. And somehow, that was okay. Back at Highland Elementary, the final bell of the day rang through the hallways. Children poured out of classrooms, voices rising in excitement as they headed toward the buses, lined up in the pickup lane. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the playground as students found their usual places in line, organizing themselves by bus number with the practiced ease of routine. Bus 17's line grew steadily. Zoe arrived first, her oversized book clutched to her chest, eyes scanning the parking lot for the familiar yellow vehicle. The Rodriguez twins followed, arguing good-naturedly about a playground incident. Then came Ben, backpack unzipped and trailing papers, and Tyler with a science project held carefully in front of him. But bus 17 wasn't in its usual spot. Instead, an unfamiliar man stood beside the door of a different bus, checking a clipboard with a slight frown. "Where's Mr. Thomas?" Ben asked, looking up at the stranger with wide eyes. The man, tall with salt and pepper hair and glasses perched low on his nose, looked down at the growing group of confused children. "Hello there. I'm Mr. Hank," he said, his voice deeper than Thomas's but gentle. "I'll be your driver this afternoon. Mr. Thomas wasn't feeling well today." A murmur rippled through the children. Mr. Thomas was never sick. He'd been there just this morning. "Is he okay?" Zoe asked quietly, hugging her book tighter. Mr. Hank's smile faltered slightly. "I'm sure he'll be fine. He just needed to rest. Today. Now let's get everyone on board so we can get you all home on time." The children filed onto the bus, subdued by the change in routine. Zoe hesitated at the steps, looking up at Mr. Hank. "Third row, right side," he said with a kind smile. "Mr. Thomas left notes about where everyone likes to sit." Zoe nodded, surprised and touched that Thomas had thought to leave such information. She made her way to her usual seat, opening her book but not reading, her thoughts with their missing ew. Driver. As the bus pulled away from the school, the children were quieter than usual. Mr. Hank was nice enough, but he didn't know their names yet, didn't ask Tyler about his chickens, or remind Ben about his seatbelt without being prompted. The route felt different somehow, even though they followed the exact same roads they traveled every day. At the hospital across town, chaos erupted in the emergency room as paramedics burst through the automatic doors with a stretcher. Male, 58, cardiac arrest, down approximately 10 minutes before CPR was initiated, one paramedic called out as they rushed past the desk. "Friend performed CPR until we arrived. We've given 2 rounds of epinephrine and 1 shock en route." The emergency team swarmed around Thomas, moving him from the stretcher to a bed, attaching monitors, checking vital signs, placing an oxygen mask over his face. His shirt had been cut open, exposing his chest where defibrillator pads were already in place. BP 80-40, heart rate 45 and irregular, oxygen saturation 88%, a nurse called out, reading from the monitor. "Let's get a 12-lead EKG and call cardiology," the doctor ordered, leaning over Thomas with a stethoscope. Sir, can you hear me?" Thomas's eyes remained closed, his face gray beneath the oxygen mask. The monitor beeped a warning as his heart rate dropped further. "He's going into V-fib again," a nurse announced, her voice calm but urgent. "Charging to 200. Everyone clear," the doctor called out. Thomas's body jerked as the electrical current passed through it, then settled back onto the bed. The monitor showed no improvement. "Resume CPR. Push another epinephrine. Where's respiratory? We need to intubate." The room was a blur of controlled urgency, each person focused on their task, working together to save the life of a man they didn't know, a man who had gotten up that morning expecting just another ordinary day. In the waiting room, Frank paced back and forth, his work boots leaving scuff marks on the linoleum floor. He'd followed the ambulance in his truck, calling Linda repeatedly as he drove. She hadn't answered, probably still with a patient, unaware that her husband was fighting for his life, just a few floors away from where she worked. Finally, Frank approached the reception desk again. "Please," he said, his voice rough with worry. I need to find Linda Miller. She works here as a nurse. Her husband's the one they just brought in. The receptionist looked up with sympathetic eyes. I've sent a message to her department. Someone's looking for her now. Frank nodded his thanks and resumed pacing. The minutes stretched endlessly. Other people in the waiting room glanced at him occasionally, then away, respecting his obvious distress. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, the doors to the emergency department opened. A doctor emerged, his face serious as he scanned the waiting room. Family of Thomas Miller? Frank stepped forward. I'm his friend. His wife works here. They're trying to find her. The doctor nodded. I'm Dr. Chen. Can we talk over here? Frank followed him to a quieter corner, his heart pounding with dread. Mr. Miller has suffered a massive heart attack, Dr. Chen explained, his voice low and compassionate. We're doing everything we can, but I want to be honest with you. His condition is extremely critical. We're preparing to take him to the cardiac catheterization lab to try to open the blocked artery, but his heart has been severely damaged. Frank felt the room tilt slightly. Is he going to make it? Dr. Chen's hesitation was answer enough. We're doing everything possible, but you should prepare for the possibility that, no. The voice came from behind them, sharp and breathless. Frank turned to see Linda standing there, still in her nurse's scrubs, her face drained of color. No, she repeated, moving forward. Where is he? I need to see him. Mrs. Miller, I'm Dr. Chen. I'm so sorry. I know who you are, Linda cut in. I work in pediatrics. Where is my husband? They're preparing to take him to cath lab, Dr. Chen explained gently. You can see him briefly before they go. Linda nodded, her nurse's training kicking in, helping her process the information clinically even as her heart was breaking. She turned to Frank. What happened? Frank explained quickly. The chest pains Thomas had been having, his reluctance to seek help, the collapse in the break room. I should have made him go to the doctor this morning when I first saw him, he finished, his voice cracking. I knew something was wrong. Linda shook her head. You know how stubborn he is. Even I couldn't get him to see a doctor when his blood pressure was high last year. She took a deep breath. I need to see him now. Dr. Chen led them through the double doors into the emergency department. The sounds and smells were familiar to Linda, the beeping of monitors, the antiseptic sharpness in the air, the controlled urgency of medical staff, but now they took on a terrifying new significance. Thomas lay on a bed surrounded by equipment, tubes, and wires. His face was partially obscured by an endotracheal tube, his chest rising and falling with the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator. Linda moved to his side, taking his hand, her nurse's eyes taking in the numbers on the monitors, understanding their grim message even as her heart refused to accept it. Thomas, she whispered, leaning close to his ear. I'm here. You hang on, you hear me? The kids on your route need you. I need you. A nurse approached gently. Mrs. Miller, they're ready to take him up now. Linda nodded, stepping back, watching, as they prepared to move him. I'll be waiting, she promised as they wheeled him away. Left alone with Frank in the suddenly quiet room, Linda's professional composure crumbled. He was fine this morning, she sobbed, allowing Frank to awkwardly put his arm around her shoulders. He left me a note by the coffee maker like he always does. Back on bus 17, Hank was doing his best to follow Thomas's route exactly as described, in the hastily written notes. The children had warmed up to him somewhat, but there was still a sense of something missing, a hole left by Thomas's absence. As they approached the Baker Street stop, Zoe closed her book and moved to the front of the bus. Mr. Hank, she said hesitantly, do you know when Mr. Thomas will be back? Hank glanced at her in the rearview mirror. I'm not sure, sweetheart. Hopefully soon. Zoe nodded, returning to her seat. The bus continued its journey, dropping children off one by one. At each stop, parents who were used to exchanging a quick wave with Thomas looked confused at the sight of a different driver. "Where's Thomas today?" Tyler's mother asked when her son descended the steps. "Not feeling well," Hank explained briefly. "I'm filling in." The news spread quickly from stop to stop, parent to parent. By the time the bus reached the last few stops, some parents were approaching with concerned faces, asking for more details that Hank couldn't provide. "All I know is he wasn't feeling well and went home," he repeated at each inquiry. "I'm sure the school will let everyone know more when they can." In the cardiac catheterization lab, a team worked with focused intensity on Thomas. The procedure to insert a stent and open his blocked coronary artery was underway, but complications kept arising. His heart rhythm remained unstable, requiring repeated interventions. "Blood pressure's dropping again," a nurse announced. "Push another unit of plasma," the cardiologist ordered without looking up from her work. "We've got to get this vessel open." Outside in the waiting area, Linda sat with Frank, both of them silent, lost in their own thoughts. Linda clutched her phone, having made the difficult call to their son in California. He was trying to get a flight out but wouldn't arrive until morning at the earliest. "He's going to hate missing tomorrow's morning route," Linda said suddenly, a small sad smile touching her lips. Frank looked up. "What?" "Thomas. If he's still in the hospital tomorrow, he'll be so upset about missing his route." She shook her head. 15 years without missing a day. He was so proud of that. Frank nodded, understanding. "The kids asked about him this afternoon. They noticed right away something was wrong when he wasn't there." "Those kids mean everything to him," Linda said softly. "He knows all their names, their birthdays, what they're afraid of, what makes them happy. Sometimes I think he knows them better than their own parents do." "That's what makes him such a good driver," Frank agreed. "It's never been just a job. To him." The doors to the waiting area opened and Dr. Chen appeared again, accompanied by another doctor in surgical scrubs. Linda stood immediately, reading their expressions before they could speak. "Mrs. Miller," the new doctor began, "I'm Dr. Patel, the cardiologist who performed your husband's procedure. We were able to place a stent in the blocked artery, but I'm afraid there was significant damage to his heart muscle before we could restore blood flow." Linda nodded mechanically, her medical training helping her understand the words even as her mind rebelled against their meaning. "He's currently in the cardiac intensive care unit," Dr. Patel continued. "His condition is extremely critical. The next 24 hours will be crucial." "Can I see him?" Linda asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course. I'll take you to him." Frank touched Linda's arm. "I'll wait here. You go be with him." Linda followed Dr. Patel through a maze of corridors to the ICU. Outside Thomas's room, the doctor paused. "He's on a ventilator and multiple medications to support his heart function," she explained gently. "He's not conscious, but many patients can still hear when their loved ones speak to them." Linda nodded, steeling herself before entering the room. Despite her years of nursing experience, nothing had prepared her for seeing her husband like this. Vulnerable, diminished, surrounded by machines keeping him alive. She moved to his bedside, carefully taking his hand between hers, mindful of the IV lines. "Hey you," she said softly. "The kids on your route were asking about you today. You've got to get better so you can get back to them." Her voice broke. "Back to me." Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere across town, the children from Bus 17 were telling their families about the substitute driver, wondering when Mr. Thomas would return, unaware that at this very moment he was fighting the hardest battle of his life, and losing. Night fell over the hospital. The corridor lights dimmed to a soft glow as the ICU settled into its quieter rhythm. Linda remained at Thomas's bedside, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her eyes fixed on the steady rise and fall of his chest, a movement created not by his own strength, but by the mechanical precision of the ventilator. The monitors beeped quietly, numbers flickering in the semi-darkness, telling a story that Linda understood all too well from her years of nursing. A nurse, Maria according to her name tag, entered quietly to check Thomas's vital signs and adjust his medications. "How is he?" Linda asked, though she could read the monitors herself. Maria's eyes were kind, but honest. His blood pressure is still very low, despite the medications. We're doing everything we can to support him. Linda nodded, grateful for the honesty. I know, thank you. Would you like a cot brought in? You could rest a little, Maria offered. Linda shook her head. No, I'm fine here. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving his side, not even to sleep. Not when each moment might be their last together. I'll bring you some tea then, Maria said, patting Linda's shoulder before leaving the room. Alone again with Thomas, Linda leaned closer to him. Remember our first apartment? She whispered. That tiny place above the laundromat? You used to say the rumbling of the dryers was like living next to the ocean. She smiled at the memory. We had so many plans then, and look at all we've done together. Look at the life we've built. She talked on through the night, telling stories of their 35 years together, pausing only when medical staff came in to check on Thomas. Sometimes she thought she saw his fingers twitch, his eyelids flutter, but it might have been wishful thinking or just the effects of the medications flowing into his veins. As dawn approached, Linda dozed off briefly in the chair, her head resting on the edge of Thomas's bed. She woke with a start when the door opened, revealing Dr. Patel with a fresh white coat and a serious expression. Mrs. Miller, good morning, she said. I'd like to discuss your husband's condition. We've run some additional tests overnight. Linda straightened, immediately alert. Tell me. Dr. Patel pulled up a chair beside her. The damage to Mr. Miller's heart is extensive. Despite the stent and medications, his heart is struggling to maintain adequate function. His kidneys are beginning to show signs of failure due to the poor circulation. Linda took a deep breath. What are our options? We can continue the current course of treatment, but I need to be honest with you. His chances of recovery are very slim. If he survives, he would likely need a heart transplant eventually. And given the extent of the damage, he may not be a candidate. The words hit Linda like physical blows, but she maintained her composure. He wouldn't want to live on machines, she said quietly. Not if there's no real chance of recovery. Dr. Patel nodded. I understand. Take some time to think about it. Your son is arriving this morning, correct? Yes, his flight lands at 9. We'll continue full support until you've had time to talk with him and make decisions together. After Dr. Patel left, Linda moved even closer to Thomas, her face near his ear. Our boy is coming, she whispered. He'll be here soon. You hang on a little longer, okay? Just a little longer. Across town, the morning routine at Highland Elementary was beginning. Children arrived by car, by foot, and by bus, streaming into the building with lunch boxes and backpacks. Bus 17 pulled up with Mr. Hank at the wheel again, the children filing out with curious glances back at their substitute driver. In the principal's office, a small crisis meeting was underway. Principal Diane Wong sat behind her desk, facing Frank. From the bus depot and the school counselor, Ms. Rivera. So we have no update on Mr. Miller's condition? Ms. Wong asked. Frank shook his head. Linda called me this morning. It's not good. The doctors are talking to their son when he arrives, but... His voice trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging heavily in the air. Ms. Wong sighed deeply. We need to prepare for how to handle this with the students. Many of them have known Mr. Miller for years. He's a fixture in their lives. Ms. Rivera nodded. The younger children especially may have trouble understanding. We should have counselors available for all the Bus 17 students today. I'll arrange that, Ms. Wong agreed. And someone should talk to Mr. Hank. Make sure he's prepared for questions from the children this afternoon. I'll do that, Frank offered. He's a good guy. He'll handle it well. Thank you, Frank, and please let us know if there's any change in Thomas's condition, or if there's anything we can do for Linda. After Frank left, Ms. Wong turned to Ms. Rivera. We should prepare for the worst, she said quietly. Thomas has been with us for 15 years. Many of our teachers and staff know him well. This will hit our school community hard. At the hospital, Thomas's son David arrived, rushing into the ICU with the harried look of someone who had been traveling for hours. Linda rose to embrace him. her composure finally breaking as she felt her son's arms around her. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I should have visited more often. I should have been here." Linda pulled back to look at him, struck by how much he resembled his father. The same steady gaze, the same strong jaw. "You're here now," she said. "That's what matters." Together they sat by Thomas's bed while Dr. Patel explained his condition again, outlining the limited options available. "His heart is too damaged to recover," she concluded gently, "and the longer we maintain him on life support, the more his other organs will suffer." David's face crumpled. "Dad always said he didn't want to be kept alive by machines," he said. Looking to his mother for confirmation, Linda nodded. "He made that very clear to both of us." "Then I think we should respect his wishes," David said, his voice breaking. "But it's so hard to let go." "I know," Linda whispered, squeezing his hand. "I know." After more discussion with the medical team, Linda and David made the heart-wrenching decision to withdraw life support. The doctors would remove the breathing tube and turn off the medications, keeping Thomas's blood pressure artificially elevated. They would keep him comfortable with pain medication, allowing nature to take its course. "Can we have some time with him first?" David asked. "Of course," Dr. Patel assured them. "Take all the time you need. When you're ready, just let the nurses know." Left alone with Thomas, Linda and David each held one of his hands. "Remember when Dad taught me to drive?" David said, smiling through tears. "He was so patient, even when I nearly crashed into the mailbox." Linda laughed softly. "He came inside white as a sheet but told me you were a natural." "He always saw the best in everyone," David said, "even when we didn't deserve it." They shared stories for hours, talking to Thomas and to each other, weaving a tapestry of memories that spanned decades. Outside the hospital windows, life went on. People walked dogs, delivered packages, waited for buses. Inside the small ICU room, time seemed suspended. Finally, Linda nodded to David. "It's time," she said softly. "We need to let him go." David pressed his father's hand to his cheek. "I love you, Dad," he whispered. "Thank you for everything." Linda called for the nurse, who summoned Dr. Patel and the rest of the team. With gentle efficiency, they explained the process once more, making sure Linda and David understood what would happen. "He won't suffer," Dr. Patel assured them. "We'll make sure of that." The respiratory therapist carefully removed the breathing tube while a nurse adjusted the medication drips. Thomas's breathing became his own, shallow and labored, but his. Linda and David returned to his side, talking to him softly, telling him it was okay to let go. For nearly an hour, Thomas continued to breathe on his own, his body fighting to survive even as his damaged heart struggled to function. Then, as the late afternoon sun cast golden light through the window, his breathing began to slow. The pauses between breaths grew longer, his pulse weaker. "We're here, love," Linda whispered, her tears falling onto their clasped hands. "We're right here with you." With one final, gentle exhale, Thomas Miller was gone. The room fell silent, except for the soft crying of his wife and son, holding each other as they said goodbye to the man who had been the center of their world. Outside the hospital, unaware of the moment of passing, the yellow buses of Highland Elementary lined up for the afternoon route. Mr. Hank stood beside bus 17, his list of students in hand, his expression somber. The principal had asked him to wait before boarding the children, as she had an announcement to make. Ms. Wong walked to the front of the bus line, a heavy weight on her shoulders. How do you tell children that someone they saw every day, someone they trusted with their safety, someone who knew their names and their stories would never return? The children of bus 17 gathered around her, their faces curious and concerned. Among them, Zoe clutched her book, Ben fidgeted with his backpack strap, and Tyler stood with unusual stillness. "Children," Ms. Wong began, her voice gentle but clear, "I have some very sad news to share with you. Mr. Thomas, your bus driver, became very ill yesterday." Little faces looked up at her, sensing the gravity in her tone. The doctors tried very hard to help him, she continued, choosing her words carefully. But his heart was too sick. Mr. Thomas passed away this afternoon. A collective gasp rose from the group, followed by silence, then sniffles, then questions. All at once, what does passed away mean? Is he coming back tomorrow? Who's going to drive our bus now? Ms. Wong answered each question with patience and compassion, explaining in age-appropriate terms what had happened. Ms. Rivera stood nearby, watching for children who might need extra support. Zoe, her eyes brimming with tears, raised her hand. Did Mr. Thomas know we missed him? She asked in a small voice. Ms. Wong knelt down to her level. I'm sure he did, she said. Mr. Thomas cared about all of you very much. As the children boarded the bus with heavy hearts, Mr. Hank counted them with extra care, knowing that today, of all days, these children needed to feel safe and looked after. The bus pulled away from the school, carrying its precious cargo home. In the third row right side, Zoe opened her book but didn't read. Instead, she looked out the window at the familiar route, seeing it through tears, knowing it would never be quite the same again. The sun was setting as Bus 17 completed its route, the same roads Thomas had traveled thousands of times before. Mr. Hank drove carefully, honoring the legacy of the man whose seat he now occupied, understanding that he wasn't just driving a bus, he was carrying forward a tradition of care. The days following Thomas Miller's death passed in a blur for Linda. There were arrangements to make, people to notify, papers to sign. David stayed by her side through all of it, handling the details she couldn't bring herself to face. Friends brought food that piled up in the refrigerator, untouched. The house felt too empty, too quiet without Thomas's steady presence. On the third morning, Linda woke early, habit drawing her to the kitchen where she half expected to find Thomas's note by the coffee maker. The empty counter brought fresh tears. She made coffee anyway, sitting at the kitchen table where they'd shared breakfast for decades, staring at his empty chair. The ringing phone broke her reverie. It was Frank from the bus depot. Linda, I hope I'm not calling too early, he said, his voice gentle. No, it's fine. I was up. I wanted to ask you something. The kids from Thomas's route, they want to do something for him. For you. The school's helping them organize a memorial. Would that be okay? Linda pressed a hand to her mouth, overcome by the gesture. Yes, she managed after a moment. Thomas would have liked that. They were thinking this Saturday, at the school. They want to plant a tree for him. That's perfect, Linda said. He always said those kids helped him put down roots here. After hanging up, Linda found herself drawn to the refrigerator door, covered with photos and drawings. Her fingers traced a crayon picture of Bus 17, drawn by a child whose name she didn't know but whose artwork Thomas had proudly displayed. These children had been such a big part of his life, of their life together. She'd heard countless stories about them over dinner, knew their quirks and challenges through Thomas's loving descriptions. Mom? David appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep. Who was on the phone? Linda told him about the memorial plan. Dad would have hated all the fuss, David said with a sad smile, but he would have been so touched. He never realized how many lives he touched, Linda agreed. He thought he was just driving a bus. That Saturday dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn day. Linda and David arrived at Highland Elementary to find the parking lot already filled with cars. Families streamed toward the playground area, where chairs had been set up on the grass. At the center stood a young oak tree, its roots wrapped in burlap waiting to be planted. Ms. Wong greeted them warmly, leading them to seats in the front row. We have quite a turnout, she said. Thomas meant a lot to our school community. Linda looked around in amazement. Dozens of families had gathered, children of all ages with their parents, teachers, staff from the school and bus depot. Frank was there with Nancy and other drivers. Even Dr. Chen from the hospital had come, standing respectfully at the back of the crowd. As the ceremony began, Ms. Wong stepped forward to address the gathering. We come together today to remember Thomas Miller, who for 15 years safely transported our children to and from school. But as we all know, Thomas was much more than just a bus driver. He was a guardian, a friend, a constant in our children's lives. She gestured to the young tree. We chose an oak for Thomas because, like him, it represents strength, endurance, and shelter for many. Various speakers followed. The superintendent, a parent representative, Frank from the depot. Each shared stories of Thomas's kindness, his reliability, his genuine care for the children he drove each day. Then, in a moment that caught Linda by surprise, Ms. Wong invited the children of Bus 17 to come forward. About 40 students of varying ages formed a semicircle around the tree, some holding drawings, others clutching small objects. Zoe, the quiet girl with the ever-present book, stepped forward first, her voice soft but clear. Mr. Thomas always remembered what book I was reading, even when I finished one and started another the next day. He called me the librarian and said someday I'd write books of my own. She placed a bookmark at the base of the tree. I made this for him. One by one, the children came forward with their offerings and memories. Mr. Thomas knew I was scared of the heater fan, said Ben, placing a small toy fan on the ground. He always turned it off when I got on, even when it was really cold. My chickens got out every Tuesday, Tyler said with a shy smile, and Mr. Thomas would wait an extra minute for me to help catch them. He never got mad, not once. He added a small feather to the growing collection. The Rodriguez twins came together. Mr. Thomas could always tell us apart even when our teachers couldn't, one said proudly. He said it was because I talk a little faster and Carlos has that freckle by his eye, the other added. They placed twin pine cones by the tree. On and on it went, each child sharing a memory that showed how well Thomas had known them, how much he had cared. Linda listened through her tears, discovering dimensions of her husband she hadn't fully appreciated before. These weren't just children he drove to school. They were individuals he had connected with, learned about, made feel special. When the last child had spoken, Ms. Wong invited Linda and David to help plant the tree. Together, with several of the children, they removed the burlap, placed the oak in the prepared hole, and added scoops of soil around its roots. Linda pressed the earth down firmly, thinking of Thomas's hands that had gripped the steering wheel of Bus 17 so capably for all those years. As the ceremony concluded, people came to offer condolences, share stories, or simply squeeze Linda's hand. Parents she'd never met told her how Thomas had helped their children overcome fear of riding the bus, remembered their birthdays, encouraged their interests. Teachers spoke of his professionalism and warmth. Fellow drivers recalled his mentorship and friendship. He would have been so embarrassed by all this attention, Linda told Frank with a watery smile. Maybe, Frank agreed, but he deserved every bit of it. As the crowd began to disperse, Mr. Hank approached Linda hesitantly. Mrs. Miller, I just wanted to say what an honor it is to be driving Thomas's route. The kids talk about him every day. I know I have big shoes to fill. Thank you for taking care of his kids, Linda said, touched by his words. They're taking care of me, too, Hank admitted. They're showing me all the things Thomas did, where the bumpy parts of the road are, which kids need a little extra time, who sits where. It's like he's still teaching me how to do the job right. As Linda and David prepared to leave, a small figure approached, Zoe clutching a thick envelope. Mrs. Miller, we made cards for you, she said, holding out the envelope. Everyone on Bus 17 made one. Mr. Hank helped us. Linda accepted the envelope, deeply moved. Thank you, Zoe. Thomas told me about you, you know, about how you always have your nose in a good book. Zoe's eyes widened. He talked about me? He talked about all of you, Linda assured her. You were very important to him. Later that evening, back at home, Linda and David sat at the kitchen table and opened the cards one by one. Some were elaborate with colorful drawings, others simple with just a few words. All of them expressed love for Mr. Thomas and sadness that he was gone. I never realized, David said, reading through the messages. I mean, I knew Dad loved his job, but I didn't understand how much he meant to these kids. I don't think he fully understood it either, Linda replied. He just did what came naturally to him, caring about people, noticing the little things that made them who they were. The last card in the stack was from Tyler with a drawing of chickens running across a yard and a stick figure chasing them. Inside he had written, "Mr. Thomas always waited for me. Now he doesn't have to wait anymore." Linda traced the childish handwriting with her finger, finding comfort in the simple wisdom of the words. 3 days later, Linda returned to work at the hospital, finding solace in routine and in helping others. Each morning as she left the house, she placed a note by the coffee maker, a continuation of Thomas's tradition, a way of keeping him present in their home. 1 month after Thomas's death, Linda drove to Highland Elementary after her shift. The oak tree was thriving, its few remaining leaves golden in the late autumn sun. Someone had placed a small bench beside it, and a simple plaque read, "In memory of Thomas Miller, who carried us safely for 15 years." Linda sat on the bench, watching as the buses lined up for the afternoon pickup. Bus 17 was there, now, with Mr. Hank at the wheel, but still carrying the same precious cargo Thomas had cared for so deeply. As the children began to board, Linda noticed something that made her smile through her tears. On the side of bus 17, just below the window, someone had added a small blue painted cap, like the one Thomas had worn every day for 15 years. A group of children spotted her and waved enthusiastically. Linda waved back, feeling a connection to these young people she had never met but somehow knew through Thomas's stories. They had been an extension of her family without her realizing it, additional branches on the tree of their life together. The buses pulled away one by one. Linda remained on the bench as they disappeared down the road, following the same routes Thomas had driven countless times. Life continued its forward motion, carrying everyone along, drivers and passengers alike, on a journey none of them could fully see ahead. But thanks to an ordinary man who had simply done his job with extraordinary care, the road would be a little less bumpy, the journey a little less frightening for all those whose lives he had touched. The oak tree would grow, providing shade for future generations of children. The bench would offer rest for tired bodies. And the memory of Thomas Miller, school bus driver, would live on in the stories told by children who grew into adults, who might one day tell their own children about the man in the blue cap who knew all their names and made them feel safe on their way to school. Some heroes, Linda reflected as she finally rose to leave, don't wear capes or make headlines. Some heroes simply show up, day after day, and carry others safely home.